Emma Thompson was a bright, cheerful 17-year-old high school student living in the small, picturesque suburb of Maplewood. Known for her infectious laughter and boundless enthusiasm, Emma seemed to embody the spirit of her close-knit community. Her family, though modest in their means, was tight-knit and supportive. Emma's father, a local mechanic, worked long hours to make ends meet, while her mother ran a small flower shop downtown. Despite their financial struggles, the Thompsons were a happy, loving family, always there for one another. Emma had a part-time job as a babysitter for the Wilsons, a family well regarded in the community for their apparent success and charm. She adored the Wilson children, Emily and Ben, and took great pride in her role as their caregiver. Her loyalty and kindness made her a favorite among the neighborhood, but underneath her sunny exterior, Emma harbored a secret, an intense, unspoken admiration for Rob Wilson, the father of the children she watched over. Rob Wilson, 42, was a man who had built a successful career in finance. His striking looks and charismatic personality made him the center of attention wherever he went. To the outside world, Rob appeared to have it all. Flourishing career, beautiful wife, and 2 lovely children. However, beneath the surface, Rob was growing increasingly dissatisfied with his life. His marriage to Janet, though once filled with passion, had become a source of frustration and discontent. Janet, 39, was a hard-working woman who ran a popular local bakery. Her days were consumed with managing the bakery and caring for their children, leaving little time for romance. Janet had always been the picture of poise and grace, but over the past year, the cracks in her marriage began to show. Rob's long hours at work and his growing emotional distance left Janet feeling isolated and neglected. Her attempts to rekindle the spark in their relationship were met with indifference, fueling her sense of frustration. Rob's disinterest in their marriage and the increasing number of late nights he spent away from home made Janet increasingly suspicious. It was during one of these lonely evenings that Janet's frustrations were compounded by a new development. Rob had recently embarked on a business trip, leaving Janet to handle their bustling bakery alone. The extra workload added to her already strained emotions, but it was during this period that Emma's presence in their lives began to take on a new, unsettling significance. Rob, finding himself more and more unhappy, began to seek solace in the attention Emma unwittingly provided. Emma, with her youthful charm and genuine kindness, became a source of escape for Rob. What began as innocent flirtation quickly escalated into a secret affair. The stolen glances, the lingering touches, and the shared smiles turned into a passionate and dangerous relationship. Emma, who had always admired Rob from afar, was thrilled by the attention. She was naive to the consequences of their actions and blinded by her infatuation. Rob's behavior became increasingly erratic as he juggled his growing affair with his responsibilities at home. He would make excuses for his absences, claiming extra work hours or business meetings. Janet, growing more suspicious, began to notice the discrepancies in Rob's stories. She felt a gnawing sense of unease, but struggled to pinpoint the cause. The catalyst for the impending disaster came in the form of a sudden, unexpected business trip that Rob had to undertake. With Rob away, Emma and Janet's paths crossed more frequently. Emma's role as the Wilsons' babysitter allowed her to be alone in their home more often. This created the perfect opportunity for her and Rob to meet in secret, further intensifying their illicit affair. One warm summer evening, as the sun set over Maplewood, Janet found herself sitting alone in their dimly lit kitchen, her thoughts consumed by worry. She had just finished closing the bakery and was now preparing dinner for her children. Rob had claimed he would be working late on a critical project. Janet's mind raced as she replayed the events of the past weeks, the unexplained absences, the late-night phone calls, and the strange messages on Rob's phone. Emma's role in the Wilson family, initially perceived as innocent and benign, now seemed to be a source of discomfort for Janet. Her suspicions about Rob's fidelity had been mounting, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Janet's anxiety reached a boiling point when she decided to take matters into her own hands. In an effort to uncover the truth, Janet decided to surprise Rob by arriving home early. She hoped to catch him in the act or at least confront him about his behavior. She finished her preparations, her hands trembling as she glanced at the clock. With a deep breath, Janet left the bakery and headed toward their home, determined to get answers. As she drove through the quiet streets of Maplewood, Janet's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced with the possibilities of what she might find. The sky had darkened, and the streetlights cast eerie shadows as she approached her house. Janet parked her car a few blocks away, taking a moment to steady herself before walking toward the house. From her vantage point, Janet saw Rob's car parked in a secluded spot near their home. Her pulse quickened as she watched him get out of the car and head toward the back entrance of the house. Janet's dread turned to a cold certainty as she realized that Rob had to be hiding something. She followed him at a distance, her footsteps silent on the paved path. Her breath caught in her throat as she approached the back of the house. Rob's figure was barely visible through the window, but Janet could see him speaking animatedly with someone. Her heart sank as she recognized Emma's familiar silhouette standing close to him. Janet's worst fears were confirmed as she watched them interact in a way that went beyond mere conversation. The scene before her was a direct contradiction to the image of a loving family she had clung to. In that moment, Janet knew her life was about to change irrevocably. The discovery of Rob's affair with Emma, once a distant suspicion, was now a brutal reality. As she stood there, hidden in the shadows, Janet's mind was consumed by a torrent of emotions: betrayal, anger, and a profound sense of loss. With the catalyst set in motion, Janet's world began to unravel. The once stable foundation of her marriage and family life was now shaken by the seismic shock of Rob's infidelity. The stage was set for a dramatic and devastating confrontation that would lead to tragic consequences. The seemingly perfect lives of the Wilsons and the Thompsons were on a collision course, and the fallout from this revelation would have far-reaching implications for everyone involved. As the evening wore on and Janet's resolve hardened, she knew that the path ahead would be fraught with conflict and heartache. The secrets that had been carefully hidden were now poised to come crashing down, setting the stage for the unraveling of their lives. As the days passed, the affair between Emma Thompson and Rob Wilson grew increasingly intense. Their secret meetings, once rare and fleeting, became more frequent and desperate. They stole moments together whenever Rob's work obligations and family duties provided an opportunity. The clandestine nature of their relationship only heightened the thrill, but it also deepened the sense of danger that surrounded them. Emma, who had always been a diligent and trustworthy babysitter, was now ensnared in a web of deceit. Her youthful enthusiasm had been replaced with a consuming obsession for Rob. What had started as innocent admiration had evolved into a full-blown affair that took over her thoughts and emotions. She found herself sneaking around, her heart racing each time she met Rob. Each encounter was a heady mix of passion and guilt, a dangerous game that neither of them seemed able to resist. Rob, on the other hand, was becoming increasingly reckless. The affair with Emma provided an escape from his marital discontent and the pressures of his high-stakes job. He reveled in the attention and affection Emma gave him, something he felt was lacking in his relationship with Janet. Rob's behavior became erratic. He was often short-tempered and distracted, a stark contrast to his usual composed demeanor. His justifications for working late became more elaborate, and he started to rely on a network of fabricated excuses to cover his tracks. Janet Wilson's suspicions continued to grow. She had always trusted Rob implicitly, but now every small inconsistency fueled her paranoia. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, and the occasional unexplained expenses all seemed to point to something sinister. Despite her best efforts to confront Rob about her concerns, he remained dismissive and evasive, further fueling her unease. One particularly sweltering evening, Janet decided to take matters into her own hands. She had noticed a pattern in Rob's absences and was convinced that he was hiding something significant. Determined to uncover the truth, she resolved to follow him. Janet's decision was driven by a mix of frustration and desperation, and she knew that her actions could either validate her worst fears or expose her to a harsh reality. As Rob left the house that evening, Janet trailed behind him discreetly. She drove at a cautious distance, her heart pounding with every mile. Rob's car wound its way through the quiet suburban streets before eventually pulling into a secluded parking lot on the edge of town. Janet parked her car a few rows away, watching as Rob's figure disappeared into the darkness. She waited anxiously, her fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. After what seemed like an eternity, Rob's car reappeared, and Janet followed him back to their neighborhood. The sight of Rob's car pulling into their driveway confirmed her suspicions. He had been out, but it seemed he had returned home alone. Later that night, Janet's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. She struggled to reconcile the evidence of Rob's betrayal with the man she thought she knew. Her frustration grew as she realized that she needed more concrete proof if she were to confront him effectively. Meanwhile, Emma and Rob's secret meetings became more elaborate. They had established a routine. Emma would come over when Janet was at the bakery and the children were at school. They would meet in the secluded areas of their house, away from the prying eyes of the outside world. Their rendezvous were marked by passionate embraces and whispered conversations, but there was always an underlying tension, a constant fear of being discovered. One afternoon, as Emma arrived at the Wilsons' house for her usual babysitting shift, she found Rob waiting for her. Their usual meeting spots were becoming too risky, so Rob had taken to sneaking Emma into his office, a space rarely visited by the family. The office, with its heavy curtains and locked doors, had become their secret haven. As the sun cast long shadows across the room, Rob and Emma lost themselves in each other's company. Their conversations were a blend of flirtation and longing, punctuated by moments of passionate intimacy. Yet, amid their stolen joy, there was an ever-present fear of being caught. Emma's heart raced each time she heard a noise or saw a shadow moving outside the office window. The following day, Janet's paranoia reached a new level. She had been unable to shake the feeling that Rob's increasingly bizarre behavior was linked to something, or someone, he was hiding. She noticed Emma's car parked outside the Wilsons' house during what should have been her break time. Janet's suspicion flared as she saw Emma's familiar silhouette through the window, talking animatedly with Rob. Desperate for answers, Janet decided to confront Emma directly. She arranged a casual visit under the pretense of checking in on the children. When Janet arrived at the Wilsons' house, her nerves were on edge. She greeted Emma with a strained smile, trying to mask her underlying anxiety. Janet's questions about the children were casual, but her gaze was sharp, searching for any signs of the truth. Emma, caught off guard, tried to remain composed. She sensed the tension in Janet's voice and the sharpness in her eyes. Their conversation was polite but strained, with Emma's responses becoming more guarded as Janet's probing questions continued. Janet's unsettling intuition told her that something was amiss, but she had no solid evidence to confront Emma or Rob. One evening, Janet's frustration boiled over. She had been tracking Rob's movements, and his behavior had become increasingly erratic. He had been late again, and Janet's patience was wearing thin. She decided to follow him once more, this time with a determined resolve to uncover the truth. As Rob drove through the dimly lit streets, Janet followed at a discreet distance. Her mind was a whirl of thoughts and fears. Rob's car pulled into a familiar parking lot, and Janet's heart sank as she saw Emma's car parked nearby. She parked her own vehicle and walked cautiously toward the meeting spot, her breath catching in her throat as she approached. Janet hid behind a row of bushes, her heart racing as she watched Rob and Emma approach a secluded bench in the park. Their laughter and soft whispers reached her ears, and she could see them holding hands, their faces lit by the soft glow of a nearby street lamp. Janet's anger and betrayal were palpable as she watched the scene unfold. The confrontation was inevitable. Janet's emotions surged as she realized the extent of Rob's betrayal. The affair between Rob and Emma had been a closely guarded secret, but Janet's discovery had shattered the illusion of normalcy. As the evening wore on, Janet was left grappling with the realization of her husband's infidelity and the profound impact it would have on her life and her family. The tension and secrecy that had defined Rob and Emma's affair were now laid bare, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. Janet's mounting anger and the revelations of the affair were about to culminate in a dramatic clash that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. The days following Janet's discovery of Rob's affair were fraught with a turbulent mix of fear, rage, and confusion. Her emotions were a constant storm, fueled by the weight of her newfound knowledge. The normally predictable rhythms of her life had been shattered, and the lines between reality and her worst nightmares had blurred. One particularly sweltering afternoon, Janet decided to confront the situation head-on. She was convinced that if she didn't act soon, the emotional turmoil would consume her. Her decision to take action was driven by a potent mixture of betrayal and the desire for resolution. The heat of the summer sun felt oppressive, mirroring the intensity of her emotions. Janet's resolve was steely as she made her way to the Wilsons' house, her mind racing with thoughts of what she was about to do. Her plan was to catch Rob and Emma in the act, to confront them both and to demand the truth. She was driven by the need for answers, though she knew that her actions could have dangerous consequences. Emma arrived at the Wilsons' house just before Janet did. It was another day of routine, with Emma slipping into her familiar role of babysitter. Unbeknownst to her, this day would be anything but ordinary. The house was quiet as Janet approached, the soft hum of the air conditioner barely audible through the closed windows. Janet's heart pounded as she parked her car a few blocks away and approached the house on foot. With a mix of trepidation and determination, Janet approached the back entrance, the door to which had always been slightly ajar for Emma. Her mind was a whirlwind of anger and hurt, but she focused on her purpose. She had decided to confront Rob and Emma in the one place where their secrecy had thrived, their sanctuary. As Janet quietly opened the door, she was greeted by the familiar scent of fresh cookies, a reminder of the normalcy she once cherished. The house was eerily quiet, save for the soft sounds of children playing upstairs. Janet crept down the hallway, her heart racing with each step. The sounds of muted conversation and occasional laughter led her toward the office, Rob's private space that had become a haven for his affair. Janet's breath caught as she approached the office door, which was partially open. The sight before her was both shocking and heartbreaking. Rob and Emma were seated on the office couch, their faces flushed and their expressions a mix of affection and guilt. Rob's arm was draped around Emma, their closeness evident in every gesture. The scene was intimate and tender, an unsettling contrast to the anger boiling within Janet. Janet's presence went unnoticed for a moment, but the sight of Rob's hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder was the final straw. Her emotions erupted as she stepped into the room, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Rob, Emma," she shouted, her voice echoing through the quiet space. Both Rob and Emma looked up, their faces paling as they realized they had been discovered. Emma sprang up, her eyes wide with fear, while Rob struggled to compose himself. The confrontation was immediate and chaotic, with Janet's anguish spilling over as she demanded an explanation. Her words were a torrent of accusation and betrayal, each sentence punctuated by the raw pain of her discovery. Rob attempted to defuse the situation, but his explanations were weak and unconvincing. He stammered, trying to justify his actions, but Janet's hurt was too profound for his words to mend. The affair had shattered their trust, and the reality of Rob's betrayal was a brutal blow that left Janet reeling. Emma, feeling trapped and exposed, tried to retreat, but Janet's anger was unrelenting. The conversation escalated into a heated argument, with voices raised and emotions running high. Janet's rage was fueled by the sense of betrayal, and her anger quickly turned to a more primal force. In the midst of the confrontation, Janet's anguish reached a boiling point. She grabbed a nearby object, a heavy, ornate paperweight from Rob's desk. The moment was chaotic, and in her frenzied state, Janet's actions became uncontrollable. The paperweight, once an innocent decoration, became an instrument of violence as Janet swung it with a sudden, desperate force. The object connected with Emma's head with a sickening thud. Emma collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing briefly before becoming still. The room fell silent, the gravity of what had just happened settling in like a heavy fog. Janet's initial shock was followed by a wave of horror as she realized the magnitude of her actions. Rob, his face ashen, rushed to Emma's side, attempting to revive her with frantic, ineffectual movements. The sight of Emma's lifeless body only compounded his guilt and fear. Janet stood frozen, the paperweight still clutched in her trembling hand, her mind struggling to process the horrifying reality before her. As panic set in, Janet and Rob's responses were driven by fear. Janet, her thoughts racing, knew that they needed to cover up the crime or face the consequences of their actions. She hurriedly cleaned up the scene, wiping away any traces of the confrontation. Rob, equally desperate, called emergency services, but his attempts to mask the situation were fraught with tension and urgency. When the police arrived, they were met with a chaotic scene. Janet and Rob's conflicting stories only fueled the confusion as they tried to piece together the events of the evening. Janet claimed it had been an accident, a moment of uncontrolled rage that had led to Emma's death. Rob's attempts to corroborate Janet's story were undermined by the inconsistencies in their accounts. The investigation into Emma's death unfolded with a mix of scrutiny and suspicion. Detectives pieced together the evidence, uncovering the details of the affair and the volatile confrontation that had led to Emma's murder. The affair, once a hidden secret, was now at the center of the investigation, revealing the underlying causes of the tragedy. Janet's trial was a media sensation, with the community grappling with the shocking revelation of the affair and the brutal nature of Emma's death. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution presented their case, highlighting the premeditated nature of Janet's actions and the emotional turmoil that had driven her to commit the crime. The defense, while acknowledging Janet's guilt, argued that her actions were the result of a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by the emotional intensity of the situation. The jury deliberated for hours before reaching a verdict. Janet was found guilty of manslaughter, with the court acknowledging the mitigating factors of her emotional distress and the provocation of discovering the affair. She was sentenced to a significant prison term, her life irrevocably altered by the violence of that fateful night. Rob, whose life had been shattered by his own actions and their consequences, faced his own reckoning. The affair and its aftermath left him isolated and burdened with guilt, his marriage to Janet irreparably damaged. The impact of the events rippled through their community, leaving a trail of broken relationships and shattered lives in their wake. As Janet served her sentence, she was forced to confront the full extent of her actions and their impact on those around her. The affair that had begun with a spark of passion had ended in a devastating tragedy, and the consequences of their choices would forever mark their lives. The small town of Maplewood was left to pick up the pieces, grappling with the fallout from the scandal that had unfolded in their midst. The lives of the Thompson and Wilson families were forever changed, a stark reminder of the destructive power of secrets and the fragile nature of trust and love.